Helene Knabe was born on December 22, 1875, in Rügenwalde, a seaside town on the southern coast of the Baltic Sea. At the time, the Prussian town was a part of the German Empire, although it became a part of Poland following World War II, and today is called by its Polish name of Darowo. Helene's father, a civil engineer who built bridges and ports on the Baltic, left her mother when Helene was just an infant. After Helene's mother died, she was sent to live with her uncle. Helene had a very modest upbringing, and grew up working in the fields and vineyards of a small village. However, she always had a love of learning, and after learning about the work of Louis Pasteur, hoped to one day become a doctor. This was a seemingly unattainable goal, however, due both to her economic status and the fact that women were not yet allowed entrance into German medical schools. In the second half of the 19th century, large numbers of people from Central Europe immigrated to the United States, with many of them settling in the rapidly growing cities of what is now called the Midwest. One of these individuals was Helene's cousin, Augusta Knabe, who had immigrated to Indianapolis, Indiana. The cousins kept in touch through letters, and Augusta informed Helene that there were some medical schools in the United States that would admit women. Helene then spent several years working and scraping together enough money to finance her own immigration to America, finally succeeding and moving to Indianapolis in 1896. This was just the first phase of her preparations for medical school, however. Helene spent several more years working as a seamstress and domestic servant, both to finance her education and perfect her English. By working for families in the upper, more educated class, she was able to learn the language at a level that would allow her to be successful at the collegiate level. Helene attended Butler University, and then finally achieved her goal of attending medical school, enrolling at the Medical College of Indiana in 1900. The curriculum was rigorous and time-consuming, but Helene still managed to find the time to continue working as a seamstress to support herself. She was also able to find a way to make money in a manner related to her studies, drawing illustrations for medical textbooks. Helene excelled in medical school, becoming the only preceptee taken on by the school's director of pathology in one of her years of study. She was also asked to teach undergraduate students, and was eventually placed in charge of the pathology labs. She graduated in 1904, one of only 2 women in the graduating class. While Helene now had a medical degree, her gender limited her opportunities as a doctor. She initially remained working at the medical college, working in the lab and serving as a clinical professor in an unpaid capacity. In 1905, she became Indiana's first female deputy state health officer. The position involved clinical tasks such as processing samples and public health outreach, tracing possible outbreaks of disease and making recommendations to improve hygiene practices throughout the state. Dr. Knabe eventually was promoted to an assistant bacteriologist, which required more hours in the lab and more travel. In addition to these extra responsibilities, she continued studying, using the most current research to improve health conditions in Indiana, and speaking to the press and to local groups to educate the public on the best practices to maintain sanitary conditions in their communities. A major area of focus of Dr. Knabe's research was rabies. Her work helped her develop cutting-edge protocols to educate the public about the disease and to try to prevent its spread. Within just a few years, she was widely considered to be the expert on the disease in the state of Indiana. Despite this, when the State Board of Health needed a new superintendent of the bacteriological laboratory, Dr. Knabe was asked to take on the work of the position, but only as the acting superintendent. Dr. J. N. Hurdy, the secretary of the Indiana State Board of Health, assured her that she would ultimately be awarded the permanent superintendent position, and her annual salary would increase from $1,400 to $1,800 or $2,000 when she was. After more than a year of serving as the acting superintendent, Dr. Knabe was told by Dr. Hurdy that there was no money for her promotion and raise, and that because she was a woman, she did not merit the pay raise anyway. In November of 1908, Dr. Knabe resigned in protest, and told the story of discrimination and false promises to the press. Dr. Hurdy then named a new male superintendent, Dr. Simmons, somehow finding the funds to pay him $2,000 in his first year and $3,000 in his second. In 1909, Dr. Simmons published Dr. Knabe's research on rabies in the Indiana State Board of Health Bulletin, without citing her as the source of the information. Dr. Knabe then went into private practice, seeing patients while continuing her research on rabies. Her academic career also began to flourish during this time. She became the chair of the parasitology and hematology department at Indiana Veterinary College, where she was the first woman to be elected to the faculty. In addition, she served as a medical director and an associate professor of physiology and hygiene at the Normal College of the North American Gymnastics Union. Dr. Knabe both lived and worked out of a set of rooms in a building on the northeast corner of Delaware and Michigan Avenues in Indianapolis. The unit was set up for her to see patients and also had a bedroom. A young woman named Catherine McPherson worked out of the apartment with Dr. Knabe as her office assistant. On the morning of October 25, 1911, Catherine arrived at the apartment at 8:15 as usual. Looking into the bedroom, she saw her employer lying on the bed. The doctor normally slept with her head at the foot of the bed. Today, she was lying the other way, and her head had been shoved under the steel beam at the head of the bed. Her nightgown had been pushed up past her breasts, and her throat had been cut, the wound cutting so deep that it reached her spine. Later examination would reveal that she had died at least 6 hours before her body was discovered. Police initially believed that the doctor's death was a suicide. The police chief, Martin Hyland, believed that at 5 feet 6 inches tall and 158 pounds, the doctor was too strong to be unable to fight off any attacker, and strong enough to inflict such a gruesome injury to herself. Catherine McPherson's behavior on the morning Dr. Knabe's body was discovered seemingly supported this theory. Catherine had not called the police for almost an hour after she discovered her employer's body. She would later say that she was in shock from the scene she had found, and did not comprehend at the time that the doctor was dead, instead believing that Dr. Knabe still required help. Therefore, she began calling various physicians and Dr. Knabe's cousin, Augusta, as she had been instructed to do in case of an emergency. The police were not called until after numerous people had been to the scene and confirmed that Dr. Knabe was dead, and the trash had been taken out by the building's janitor. This delay and its consequences, of course, created major problems for the investigation. It was the opinion of the police, however, that the delay had been intentional, and that Catherine McPherson and Augusta Knabe had used that time to dispose of the weapon the doctor had used to take her own life, as no weapon was found at the scene. The coroner, however, was adamant that Dr. Knabe's death was a homicide. He based his ruling on circumstantial factors, but also on physical evidence, like the defensive wounds on the body and the position of Dr. Knabe's hands. There had in fact been 2 deep cuts made on her neck as well, and he did not believe it was possible for her to inflict them on herself. Furthermore, the doctor was right-handed, meaning that if she had taken her own life, the cuts would have been made from left to right, but they were in fact made on the right side of her body. Further supporting the idea that Dr. Knabe had been murdered was a bloody fingerprint found on her pillow. The doctor did not have blood on her hands when she was found. Jefferson Haynes, the building's janitor, lived below Dr. Knabe's apartment and reported hearing screams and then something falling to the floor during the night. He could not be sure which unit the noises were coming from, so he did not go upstairs to investigate further. When he woke up for the day around 5:30 a.m., he thought he heard someone walking in the apartment above. There were no signs of forced entry into the doctor's apartment, and nothing had been taken. There were some signs of a struggle in the bedroom. One of her slippers was near the bathroom, while the other was found near her bed, and the rug was found in disarray on the floor. Dr. Knabe's murder was heavily speculated about in the media, with a number of salacious motives for the crime being suggested. Some articles held that she had been killed by a fellow German immigrant with whom she disagreed politically. Others speculated that she had been killed by some sort of sex maniac. Dr. Knabe's main area of focus in her position at the Normal College was what we would today refer to as sexual health. She spoke to people throughout the state and across economic and racial lines about sexual health and hygiene practices, leading some to wonder if someone she was treating for a sexually transmitted disease or sexually related psychological problem may have killed her. 2 individuals were eventually charged with Dr. Knabe's murder, although the court case only increased the scrutiny of her career and lifestyle. 15 months after her death, Dr. William Craig was indicted for her murder, and Alonzo Ragsdale was indicted as an accomplice to the crime. Their arrests were the result of an investigation by Detective Harry Webster. The The private investigator had been hired using funds raised by other female doctors in Indianapolis and various women's groups to look into the case, although he remained involved in the investigation even after the funds ran out. Dr. Craig had been born in Scotland and immigrated to the United States when he was around the age of 12. He was a widower and had one daughter, Marion, who was 14 years old at the time of his trial. He was the dean of students at Indiana Veterinary College and also served as a lecturer there. He had known Dr. Knabe since 1905 and had been the person who had recommended her for her position at the school. Drs. Craig and Knabe were apparently having a variety of professional and personal problems around the time of Dr. Knabe's death. At the veterinary college, they were in the middle of a heated disagreement about altering the lecture schedule to accommodate Dr. Knabe's commitments at the normal college. The two doctors may also have been engaged to be married, although Dr. Craig would deny this. There were witnesses and letters attesting to the fact that Dr. Knabe claimed to be getting married, and she had recently ordered a fancy dress. She did not normally wear overly formal things, and could make her dresses herself, thanks to her years spent working as a seamstress, leading to speculation that she may have intended this dress to be her bridal gown. Shortly before her murder, Dr. Craig's housekeeper overheard the two of them arguing in his home. The argument appeared to be about Dr. Craig wanting Dr. Knabe to stop working following their marriage, and Dr. Knabe arguing that they could both continue to practice. The housekeeper also signed an affidavit saying that Dr. Craig had come home late on the night of October 24th and quickly changed his clothes, then left unusually early the following morning, the morning Dr. Knabe's body was discovered. The housekeeper, while called to testify at Dr. Craig's trial, refused to do so. Dr. Craig's defense team relied heavily on the theory that Dr. Knabe had taken her own life at trial. They called in witnesses who painted Dr. Knabe as aggressive and mean-spirited because she had to fight to be taken seriously in her profession, and claimed that her finances were in disarray. They claimed that as an unmarried 35-year-old woman living in a modest apartment, who was financially and professionally unsuccessful, Dr. Knabe would of course be unhappy enough to want to end her life. Further examination of Dr. Knabe's records showed that she was financially stable due to her various jobs. She simply chose to send any extra money she had to her uncle, who was no longer able to work, rather than spend it on herself. Her estate only appeared to be in debt because its executor was the other man indicted for her murder, Alonzo Ragsdale. Ragsdale was an undertaker and associate of Dr. Knabe's, who was accused of being an accomplice to the murder because he allegedly washed the silk kimono Dr. Knabe had been wearing the night of her murder, in an effort to disguise blood-stain evidence on Dr. Craig's behalf. The kimono had been a Christmas gift from Dr. Knabe's cousin, Augusta. Ragsdale was also an early vocal supporter of the suicide theory. Ragsdale did not collect on debts or file proper and accurate paperwork for Dr. Knabe's estate. Her belongings disappeared, but the proceeds from their sale was never applied to the $158 of debt attributed to her estate. The trial went on for 9 days before the judge instructed the members of the jury to acquit Dr. Craig of the charges against him. He said that while the prosecution had proven that Dr. Knabe had been murdered, there was simply not enough evidence that Dr. Craig had been the one who killed her. Since Dr. Craig was not convicted of the murder, Alonzo Ragsdale could not be found guilty as his accomplice, and the charges against him were dropped. No one else has ever been charged or convicted in the crime. Ragsdale had Dr. Knabe's estate declared insolvent, despite still never collecting on all the debts owed to her. As a result, there were no funds available to purchase a headstone for her. Her grave at the Crown Hill Cemetery remained unmarked for decades. Author Nicole Kabrowski and her husband Michael eventually purchased her a headstone a century after her untimely death.